is an adult now with JM, and I am a resource specialist, special education teacher on the elementary school level.
And I'm Michelle Best. I'm in Arlington, Virginia, just outside DC. I am a parent advocate for special education, and I work a lot with mental health issues as well. And then I'm involved, if you're ever looking at the Second Opinion, which is a completely different topic, but I'm involved with the GW Myositis Center. And so we're here today to talk to you guys a little bit about special education and 504s and accommodations and what it's like, and then accessing our community, and what it's like to find help for your child or teen who is, in school when they're experiencing symptoms of JM.
Okay, the world of special education can start within special education or start outside of special education. Typically, the areas we have are health plan, a non-binding agreement, a 504 plan, or an IEP. And if you look at the list, it looks like the non-binding agreement is as effective as an IEP. The big difference is a non-binding agreement is not a legal document. You've got nothing to stand on if somebody doesn't follow through. First would be a health plan, and then moving down the hierarchy. Health plan is also a non-binding agreement in that it's not legal. There isn't a leg to stand on if somebody doesn't follow through. 504 plan is not special education. It's accommodations and modifications within the regular education plan. Child is not put in special education, does not have special teachers. It's all regular education and things that are done to make that program successful for the child. An IEP is the child who needs special education services, whether it's a special reading teacher, occupational therapist, speech therapist, physical therapy. All of those fall under the umbrella of an IEP. Basic descriptions are right there. And I've got this on a handout, and I've got 3 different handouts that you're more than welcome to at the end. I've got one that's what is a 504 plan. I've got one that is the difference between 504 plans and IEPs, which this is the cover page of it. And then I've got another one that is potential 504 plan accommodations. And the nice thing about that accommodation sheet is you can take any of the accommodations from any one of the diseases or disabilities that they talk about and plug it into JM, wherever it applies. Let's see, an IEP, special education. Every single IEP is written for the child. There is no group plan. There is no what works for Johnny, works for Sally and Betty and Tommy down here. It is every child's individual. Same thing for a 504 plan. It's written specifically to your child, not with any other child in mind. And if somebody, and one of my pet peeves as a special education teacher is, some special education teachers will come along and go, okay, here's a goal from out here, and this is a first grade student, so I'm going to plug it in here and it fits. It's not the way it works. My child doesn't necessarily learn the same way that the 10 other kids that I have that are special education on my caseload at that same grade level. So each one of them needs different goals based on what their individual needs are in the area of reading. It could be decoding or comprehension or specific parts of comprehension, how they look at that piece. On writing, it could be just on your grammar. It could be on your penmanship. It could be on getting 3 paragraphs down. So every single one is written differently and separately. 504 plans, whatever is needed as part of that regular education plan, whether it's less problems on a page, whether it's you're exempt from an assignment entirely, whether your work periods are broken down into shorter periods, whatever it is that is accommodating in that regular education class is put in a 504 plan. And the law covers both of those.
We're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do in order to get these plans, because this is where it can get a little tricky. There are many school systems that are incredible. There are many schools that are incredible and that will come to you and say, how can I help you? And then there are school systems that say, we take care of your child just fine. Don't worry about it. So somewhere between there is where you'll probably land. It's unlikely that you'll hit one of the extremes or the other. You'll land somewhere in the middle. So we're going to just kind of teach you how to walk through some of this. Health plans, you can have a health plan and an IEP, or a health plan and a 504, or just a health plan. Basically, the health plan covers your child's ability. It's with your school clinic. So it's a plan that the clinic has and will put out to teachers as necessary to make sure that your child is not, say, overdone. For example, in PE, your student should not have too much exercise. Or, maybe your kid takes methotrexate, and maybe your kid occasionally vomits. And maybe you still want to send your kid to school because your kid has already vomited, or maybe your kid should not be sent home from school even though your child vomited. This is the role of a health plan, because we're going to say, okay, my child vomited, my child takes methotrexate, my child's feeling a little bit better, maybe we have some Zofran in the clinic, my kid can go back to class. They are not sent home, they do not need to stay home for 24 hours. I cannot even tell you how many days of school my child missed back in, say, I don't know, first, second grade, once the methotrexate finally built up enough in his system that it made him pretty nauseous. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to check your school's website, and there's going to be a lot of that. You guys are going to spend a lot of time checking out your school websites. You need the name and contact information. You're going to send a formal request via an email, and to prepare to have this meeting. And so the perfect person you're looking for in this case is probably your school nurse. And I would also CC like an assistant principal, someone like that, or if you're in a middle or high school, your child's counselor. So go ahead and request a physician letter. On the CureJM website, there is a whole document called What is JM? Some of these things are going to get redundant. You're going to hear me say them a couple times. You're going to download that. You're going to provide it. And then you're going to create a list of symptoms that affect your child. For example, my child needs sunscreen every day before he goes outside for recess. Some schools let you take the sunscreen into the classroom with you. Some schools do not. The laws vary by state, so a lot of this can be very different. You need to find out what the rules are at your school. Some of our kids are too young or refuse to put the sunscreen on by themselves. They're going to forget. Some of our kids are very responsible. So there's different ways. You need to think about how this affects your child. So when you do this, you need to meet with them and explain, maybe I need sunscreen put on by the teacher before we go out. Maybe my child needs to go down to the clinic to have sunscreen applied before he or she goes out. So you're going to have to think that through. So you're going to meet with the nurse. You're going to teach the nurse about juvenile dermatomyositis, because it's unlikely that the nurse has run into this before. You're going to prepare a plan with the nurse about what will happen if your child is feeling weak or tired. Instead of being sent home after the typical 20-25 minute limit, your child goes to the clinic, half an hour later they still don't feel well, we'll send you home. Maybe for our kids, they could have an hour or an hour and a half in the clinic before they get sent home, because think of all the half days of school that they're missing because they were tired in the morning. And please understand that when you do prepare this, that the health plan is provided to the staff who work with your child. This is a framework for a physician letter. This is available, or will be available, up on the CureJM website. And I know it's in last year's video as well. Basically, this is just a framework, but essentially what you want to have included is your child's name and age, the date of diagnosis, who the child sees. This can be done by a pediatrician. It can be done by your rheumatologist. The symptoms, how the symptoms affect your child, the comments about being access to stairs, elevator, being out in the sun, all these different kinds of things. You're going to have a physician write a very thorough letter about what's going on with your child, and then come up with some ideas of what can be helpful. So a 504 plan, as we discussed, is really just about accommodating your child. So just what I always tell parents and what I do is I think through, what are the things that are hard for my child? And this is just going back through documenting your child's needs, gather evidence of the disability, our children all have a disability just by having juvenile dermatomyositis. That in and of itself qualifies as a disability. You can get the information, you have your physician letter, the CureJM website. You need to find out who your school's 504 coordinator is. That could be somebody in the school, that could be somebody in central office. It really depends on what your school system, how they function. So you'll need to make some phone calls, do some website searches for that. If you can't figure it out, you call the principal, you call the secretary in the office. You're going to write a formal request for a 504. And then you're going to follow up on that request. If you don't hear back from them, you're going to keep asking. So to go through the 504 evaluation process, you're going to receive teacher input. They're going to observe your child. You're going to have input. You're going to take your physician letter. And again, you're going to provide the what is JM from the CureJM website. And then when you have the meeting, you need to be prepared to advocate. And you need to think through your child's day. What is hard for your child? Is it hard to get to the classroom because it's hard to go up all those stairs? Is it hard to go into the lunchroom and then back upstairs? Is that too much? Is it hard to get the sunscreen on? Do they have a hard time reaching the top shelf? Is there a locker on the top versus the bottom? Is it hard to reach things that are low because they're having trouble squatting due to muscle weakness? What is hard in your child's day? And just really think through all of those different pieces. What is hard? And know what is hard. We might not be able to fix everything, but it's important to think through the moment your child gets on that school bus, assuming your child is taking a school bus, or if they're walking to school, the moment they leave the door until the moment they walk back in the door, in terms of school, what is hard? And then you can work with the team to try and come up with solutions for what is hard. And that can be an extra set of textbooks at home. That can be reduced homework load. That can be extra time on tests. That can be saying, my child gets really tired and can't sit for very long because the muscles cramp up, and because of that, we're going to take 20 minutes of the test on Monday, and 20 minutes of the test on Tuesday, and 20 minutes of the test on Wednesday. Really, you need to think and be very, very flexible about this.
But also know that your 504 plan is always a working document. It's good for one calendar year from the day you sign it to the next year. But anything that you want changed or added, you call a 504 meeting at any time and get it added or changed.
Yes, and these are just some sample accommodations. So what we've done here is we're talking about the opportunities to have extra time to take a test, extra communication between home and school about assignments and assignments that are missed. You can put in information about the fact my child misses school a lot, so I don't always have to take a note to school because I'm putting in the 504 the fact that my child misses school a lot for physician appointments, for infusions, for the day after the infusion when my child doesn't feel great. So that can go into the 504. Some schools, my son's middle school, they did not allow them to carry backpacks to classes because they didn't want kids carrying all their stuff around. My son had an accommodation that he was allowed to carry his backpack to all of his classes because carrying all those pieces of things was too much. He was allowed to carry a water bottle. So just really think through, and some of these just seem common sense. Like most of us in here have our drinks, we all have our bags, but sometimes our kids don't have all of those things. At the high school level, it's usually a little bit looser, but as the younger they are, the more restrictions there often are, and then you need to put accommodations into place for them. Okay, for an IEP, your child has to have one of 13 conditions that are covered under the special education law, the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Thank you. And yes, JM qualifies under other health impairment. So does ADHD. So do so many things. It's basically a catch-all. So the question becomes between a 504 and an IEP, does my child need both interventions and services and accommodations, or are they okay with just accommodations? But you can never have both. So that is, if you ask Sue and I and Dan over here, so I can't read it, it's too small. The answer is no. However, there are states and there are people that have both. I don't understand how that works, but typically speaking, if you have an IEP, that would supersede the need for a 504, because if you want to think about it, a 504 is just accommodations, and I showed you a nice big accommodation list that's actually from an IEP, but I showed you a nice big accommodation list that you could put into a 504. An IEP is all of those accommodations and individualized teaching from a special education teacher. So that means somebody comes to your child and helps them with something.
Or your child goes to them.
Or your child goes to them.
There's related services or minutes on an IEP, but you can have an IEP and a health plan, and that might be something because of the medical reasons for the JM or JDM, but you wouldn't really have the 504 and an IEP.
It doesn't make any sense. That's correct. So,
could you have an IEP and a health plan?
yes.
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 Like students who are diabetic but also might have a IEP for other,
A learning disability.
they might have that health plan and
That's what
IEP.
I'm asking. 'Cause
A health plan is often really just an agreement with you and the clinic. And sometimes if you don't have an IEP, the clinic will take it out to make sure, for example, in PE, that your child is not overdone. But essentially it's an agreement with you and the clinic, so the clinic knows what to do with your child. If you want to take it down to bare bones, it can be much larger if your child does not also have a 504 or an IEP. But if you have an IEP or a 504, it really is just that kind of understanding between you and the clinic. So, again, when you're starting the process, you're going to write a formal letter. I cannot say this enough times. Write a formal letter requesting whatever it is that you are looking for. If it's a health plan, if it's a 504, if it's an IEP, or if it's just, we have something big going on, I need to have a meeting with somebody in order to discuss this. You can do that too.
I totally recommend doing it in hand instead of email, because there's always the response, oh, I didn't get the email. If you've written that letter in hand, you hand it to somebody, you ask them to date stamp it. You know they've received it right then and there. And then your timeline starts ticking.
So there is a timeline with an IEP within 10 business days, or essentially 2 weeks. And the timing on this may change by state. But the school needs to come back to you, and you guys are going to have a meeting to sit down and discuss whether or not your child should be evaluated for an IEP. And that's kind of the importance of the date stamping with an IEP. With a 504, you can actually set up that meeting, discuss whether or not your child qualifies, and walk out of there with a completed 504. That can actually happen all in one meeting. An IEP is an extensive process. It can take about 3 months.
60 days is the legal timeline.
From the
Time
testing.
the assessment plan is
Right.
signed until the IEP meeting is held, the district has a maximum of 60 calendar days.
So it's 60 calendar days. I think it's 65 in Virginia, until eligibility. What is it in Illinois?
No, it's 60.
It's 60.
Days. It also depends on summer, but it's called an initial or case study evaluation to get the data, and then they come together. So there's a domain signed about the evaluation, and then they have 60 days to finish that, and then you'll have a meeting about eligibility in regard to
Right.
special education services.
So I'm just going to repeat what he said in case you didn't hear it. So you're going to request your meeting. Within 10 days, you need to meet. At that meeting, you need to explain why your child should be evaluated for an IEP. This is only if you're looking for an IEP. We've gone through health plan, we've gone through 504. If you're looking for an IEP, why your child should be evaluated for an IEP. There are 3 kind of things that you want to think about. 1, does your child have a disability? 2, does your child's disability prevent your child from accessing their education? And it's not just the academics. There's more to your child's education than the academics. Is your child having trouble accessing PE. Is your child having trouble accessing school altogether? Is your child even able to walk in the door? So if your child cannot access their education, that's a factor. So that would qualify, if you have those first two, that would qualify your child for a 504. If your child needs the direct intervention of a person in order to access their education, that's when you start looking at an IEP, Individualized Education Plan. That means you have a special education teacher who comes and works with your child either in the classroom or in their classroom. Or it could be meets your child at the school bus when your child gets to school and helps them enter the building. So if your child needs the direct intervention of another person, that would be the IEP. So those are the three things. Those three things I just listed are critical. The first two, does your child have a disability? Yes, your child has a disability. We already have answered that. Two, does your child's disability make it so they cannot access their education? Be prepared to answer that question with examples as to why they cannot do that. You need to be able to answer that question and cite examples in order to get either an IEP or a 504. And the third one is, if you're looking for the IEP, take it a step further. Does your child require the intervention of a person in order to be able to access their education? So if you can answer all those questions, and so then your child and the team agrees, then your child will be eligible to be evaluated for an IEP. You don't have to come in hard and fast on those at the student study, but you have to put the question in the air. So you don't have to prove all of those at the beginning of the IEP process, but you have to put the question in the air. And then the school's going to do a big evaluation. It takes 60 days. There will be a teacher evaluation, a social worker evaluation, a psychological evaluation from the school psychologist, an academic evaluation. They will be talking to you. There's all kinds of testing and such that goes on over a period of 60 days, and then the whole team will come back for what's called an eligibility meeting to determine whether or not your child is eligible for an IEP. At that point, if your child is found eligible, you have to prove those three things that I've gone through. And if your child is found eligible, then the school has another 30 days to actually give you an IEP to make that happen. So the process really takes about 90 days from, you guys have less than?
60 period. We have 60 days
wow,
period.
Where we are, we do 60 days, and we have another 30 days from eligibility until we have an IEP.
I only wish.
If it's 60 and you're eligible,
Yeah.
that
Your
means
services
that
have to start.
They better be writing that IEP, I would say, within a week tops.
No, ours
Or have it
whole,
written in.
yeah, our whole 60-day evaluation, our IEP, the IEP is proposed at that point, and at that point it's decided what services will be put in place.
Okay, so
Have goals.
I'm going to say that this varies throughout the country. Find out what the rules are where you live and make sure that your school system stays within the rules for where you live. That's what I'm going to say on this one, because it's clearly different. This is Illinois, this is Virginia, this is California.
And
So
what you
it's
need
gonna
to
be
know
different.
is you've got all the rights. If you don't agree to something, it doesn't happen. If you agree to something and then in a year the IEP team says, well, now I think your child needs this, you agree, you can get those additional services. If you don't agree, it's what they call stay put. You get those current services and nothing else happens until you agree. So nothing in California.
You would differ on that until you have an IEP. When you have an IEP, the laws of IDEA, which is that IDEA law, come into play a little bit based on the like due process hearings and that stuff. The 504s are a little bit different as far as your rights, but you work with your school, try to team, and I would say that would be the best thing in regard to.
You have a question?
My 3-year-old has an IEP for preschool and public school. I know it lasts for a whole year, right?
Right.
Does it need to be reevaluated every year?
Every 3 years.
Every 3 years.
Yeah.
And then I would ask is, if you have an IEP in place, but the condition changes, do you have to have another IEP done, which includes the health changes?
No. Okay, for example, if your child is found, let's take one of mine, If your child is found eligible for an IEP in preschool due to a developmental delay, and then when they're 6 years old, all of a sudden they have autism, you're going to when you're going to have a new eligibility, which means they're going to redo all the testing, which is called a triennial, or the every 3-year evaluation, and then your child is going to be found eligible under a different label. So I remember I mentioned earlier on that there are the 13 different areas, and where JM is under OHI and ADHD is under OHI. Now, another example, my JMer was originally found eligible, I don't know, let's say it was under ADHD, okay? Then he also has JM. By the time he got his IEP, he had both. But let's say we added JM. We do not need to update the category under which he is found eligible, because JM, or juvenile myositis, and ADHD are both under OHI. So it's only if you're going into a category that is different than OHI. All the health conditions, unless it's deafness or blindness, are really pretty much under OHI. I think there's,
So
or
if you
ED,
have
yeah.
an IEP, your right to have a meeting, you can ask for a progress review meeting at any time. So if something changes for the child, and let's say they had your example of the OHI, ADHD, but now they have JDM, so you need to add something about they need to use a rolling backpack through the halls. They need that stuff. You can call for an IEP meeting, bring your documentation, or send it and say, hey, I want to update the accommodations, and therefore let all his teachers know, or their teachers know, that we want to change these accommodations to meet the needs of not only the ADHD, but the JDM stuff.
Yes, in other words, you're not changing the eligibility. You're just bringing more information forward to inform the IEP.
Yeah,
Does-
because I have an IEP in place for him, and due to the medication he's been taking a while, he's got some cognitive issues. So I wonder,
You can have a primary and a secondary disability.
okay.
Yes.
And it's
you can
sort of
look
the
into
chicken
that.
and the egg as to which is your primary and then your secondary.
You can talk to the school system. They might choose to accommodate that without adding the category, or they might choose to, do the interventions without adding the category, or they may choose not to. For example, there's many students where I am who could be having a secondary category of ED, which is emotional disturbance or emotional disability. Thank you. I prefer that. So many people have an additional emotional disability. You do not necessarily have to be found under that category if you already have an OHI. You can be served well for an emotional disability under OHI. So it's not, unless you're going into a specific program for emotional disability. So if your school system has an emotional disability class and you want to be part of that, then you would have to be found eligible under that
Your primary
classification.
disability.
So it's not emotional disability, it's just a cognitive issue. So
It's up to your school system. It really, I mean, if it's not a huge issue. So for example, again, my poor son, I'm going to bring him up again. He's been taking methotrexate for many years, and over the years he has increasing processing issues, to the point where his processing has become really quite slow. It has nothing to do with his his cognitive ability in terms of speed is slower. His academic ability has not gone down.
Right, his cognitive functioning is well, he just needs time to process.
Yes.
Yes,
So the
that's the
extended
problem I
time
have.
Exactly.
slower is helpful for him.
Yes.
That's why you have the IEP.
And so this is, because of that, that's what we've done. We have not added anything related to a learning disability for him, because it's really just it's related to his OHI,
Yeah,
we believe. Yeah, with JM, we don't know everything,
right.
but the assumption is it's related to to medications that he's been on, or some other medical thing.
Ultimately, you're not changing the service plan.
No,
If
no.
the service plan isn't changing, there's no need to change the eligibility. And then you can just that at the 3-year reevaluation.
But should I certify that the cognitive issues will develop?
Well, if he has an IEP already, they're going to do a 3-year reevaluation. You also have an annual review every year, that by law. So how he's progressing. If he's not progressing well, then you're going to go, hey, do we need to up the 3-year reeval to test him again to see what is going on?
Now, is that 3-year a federal law or a
Yes,
state?
it
law?
is federal, it's part of IEP.
Because he's been on the same IEP for 5 years.
Okay, so hold on. There's a couple of different things. Legally, federal law requires that the IEP have an annual review and a triennial. And the triennial would include the testing. You can, or to be found eligible again. Now, sometimes IEP teams choose to waive the testing and the parent has to agree. Remember, the parent is a member. I haven't said this yet, but the parent is a member of the IEP team. You choose to waive the testing. An example of where you would do this, when my son was in 7th grade, he was due for his triennial. I said, no, let's not do it in 7th grade. Let's do it in 8th grade, because in 8th grade, he's getting ready to move on to high school, and I wanted a well-informed IEP with all the testing when he walked in the door for high school. So I waived we came together and we chose not to do, we felt like his IEP was good for where he was at the time, and we chose to wait until he was in 8th grade, so that ended up being 4 years, before we did the testing again, because we wanted a well-informed IEP.
And you can also have, there's also part of it where the school system, when you're looking at it, if you have a diagnosis and you're in preschool or kindergarten, and then 3 years comes up, they can use something called the file review, okay? Which is not, you're not doing these huge batteries with the school psychology. They're doing small reports based on information that they already have. Like the teacher's reports and going, we still see that that student still needs the support of the IEP. We're going to do a file review. The diagnosis hasn't changed, so therefore we're just going to continue it. But sooner or later down the line, you want to start getting a battery with percentiles, which are nationally normed, especially when you're talking about a cognitive impairment, that those numbers that you want to see. But sometimes the school will, I'm in a high school, so it's a little bit different. So sometimes we'll have freshmen and we'll just do a file review, which is to keep them eligible. But then in junior year, we're doing a full battery, and that psych eval they can use for college in order to get accommodations under the American Disabilities Act. And that's a huge battery.
Yeah,
of
because in
stuff.
Massachusetts, you go into high school in 9th grade.
Well, it's 9th grade here.
It's 9th grade most everywhere.
Okay.
9th, 10th, 11th.
So he's going into 9th grade, and I wanted to review the IEP and advise them that due to the medication he's been taking since he was 5, he's got cognitive issues.
You should have an articulation meeting if it's a different district. If it's the same
It's the same
district,
district.
then that's why you haven't really done it, because it's all within the same district.
Yeah.
But you can request and email your IEP team and say, hey, I'm concerned about the shift of school in regard to that. Can we sit down and have a meeting at the beginning of the school year to review their plan? I mean, that should automatically happen in my opinion.
You should have actually had a meeting at somewhere between March and June, or May. I don't know where we are. It's June. In fact, today's the last day of school, and where I am, you should have had a meeting with none of my kids are in school today. You should have had. Okay, let me just go back. You should have had a meeting sometime between March, April, May, somewhere in there, with the school that your son is leaving and the school that your son is headed to. A combination meeting with members of both schools in order to do the handoff.
See, I went in and I asked, and they said, don't worry about it, we'll just transfer the files over.
So for future, I can't fix what has already happened, but what I'm going to tell. Well, yes, what I'm going to tell each one of
No.
Talk to you afterwards.
Yes.
How we navigate this.
Yeah,
to tell you the truth,
but
because
these
that
are
is-
specifics, yeah.
That's kind of weird. It could be a cooperative district if it's K through 12 and it's the same district. Sometimes they will do stuff, but there should be a meeting because there's a handoff going on. If you're
Yes.
going to a different school,
Right.
it's called an articulation meeting. It
Okay.
needed to happen.
And when James has moved schools, we have brought the school nurse in at these meetings. When we left elementary into middle school, and we left middle school into high school, we brought in the school nurse
And
both
there should
times.
be a health service update every 3 years as well in regard to that.
You talk about file review. In the elementary level, we're not allowed to do that any longer. We have to do, in the elementary level, full assessments every 3 years because our kids change so much.
So, yeah.
There's less change the older they get, so a file review is much more applicable.
Go ahead.
That was very helpful.
My older son goes to an elementary school that's out of our district.
Okay.
Proximity and everything. So last year when Declan was put on his IEP, they just put him in the same out-of-district school that my older son is in. This next year, my older son's already allowed to go to the same school he's been going to out-of-district. But the preschool, they're trying to fight me and put him into the one that's actually in our district.
It's because of funding
That's what I
and
had.
the allotment to special ed funding per district.
I guess is my question originally, that they placed them in a school out of their district.
Oh, that was a personal thing. It was a hardship thing, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So, but Declan's already had all he's got PT, the nurse, and everything at the district school. I feel like if they're gonna, he can't go to the other school because it just doesn't work at all. So, how do I push for him to?
At least in California, you can apply for school of choice, is what we did. It comes down to special ed numbers. If the district you're looking at going to is impacted in special ed, you're going to have less of a chance of getting in. If they're not as impacted, then the district that you're in will say, yeah, you can go because it's less we have to pay for. But the district receiving you has to be willing to take you.
I ran
I
into
think
that
we're gonna have a hard
problem.
time pushing back in regard to that funding for especially on a hardship. If a school is saying we can provide those same services within our district, based on the PT and the OT and everything, you're either going to a due process hearing to fight that, which I don't think you have a good leg to stand on in regard to. Because we bring back, a lot of schools will bring back schools into their district because if they're sending people out, it's therapeutic day schools, it's transportation, it's because they can't provide the support services that are on the IEP within the district, and that's why they will send them out to cooperatives or other school districts that they partner with. But that school district has to pay that other district. So if they're going, we have a PT, we have this system, we have this kind of classroom that will support your student, it's gonna be an uphill battle. I won't go.
See, I ran
He's
into that
correct.
with, when Hannah got JDM, and she was going to the charter school. They forced me out of the charter school into the public school, even though it's in the same town.
Okay, so I'm going to
The
argue
charter
that the
should-
charter school, that was inappropriate. I'm going to say that the charter school is still part of your school district.
It is.
And it is not appropriate. It is not appropriate in any way, shape, or form for a school that is part of your school system to say we are not going to offer services to your child with a disability. Because what they are doing is they are denying your child with a disability equal access to their education with their non-disabled peers. That is not okay. Your situation, however, is a little bit different because in your situation, you are requesting your school system to pay for your child to attend a different school system, which is a financial hardship for the school system. So in your situation, I'm not totally sure how I would go ahead and fight it if you can, but then if you end up with your son in your home school district, then I would take copious notes. I would be meeting with the teacher. I would be watching everything like a hawk. And if there are issues, then you need to make your case as to why this is not an appropriate placement.
At the time mine happened, we were overwhelmed, of course, with the
Right.
diagnosis. And them telling her she can't be absent from school because then they put her a grade back because it was 3 months at a time in the hospital. And so we were like, okay, what do? We don't know anyone, we don't know anything. Let's just go to the public school and see what they say. And they accepted her. And even though they couldn't bring her up to par for the time she was lost, we got a private tutor to teach her at home.
Okay, so in terms of home-based services, I am going to tell you that the education is just not equal to being in the classroom. It is just not the same. Except for you, it's not the same.
It's called homebound services. It's like
Yeah.
1 hour for every week that you miss. I mean, it's not.
It is not the same. Your child is missing a lot of education. We've had it before. My son did partial day for many, many years. We had a home-based provider come because he was just missing that one class and meeting with the teacher for just that one class. It worked out great. But if he had been needing to do it from many classes, there's no way he could have caught up. And then one year I took him for a program for 4 weeks, and that severely impacted that school year for him because he had missed 4 weeks of school. So I can see where your school system might have recommended moving into a less competitive, less stressful school environment. I don't think they could have forced you to do that unless the grades had dropped significantly. So again, there's a potential of a discrimination based on a disability in that situation, but there's also the potential that they were just giving you a wise suggestion and really strongly suggesting that you move her.
It works out for the better.
Okay, good. Yes.
So my daughter will be starting school, in the next year or so, and, obviously there's a hierarchy in terms of how formal these are. Is it best maybe as a parent advocating just to say, we're gonna start with a health plan, see how she does, and then react, or is it kind of smart to go in and say, hey, from day one, we'd like to apply for an IEP, like, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. In my opinion, it's better to have a legal document every time. Now, that said, if you go in and they say, we're willing to give you all of these things that include, and if you remember the slide from earlier on, we're going to give you some interventions and some accommodations, and then we'll talk about it later. Take it. Because if your child is receiving those accommodations and receiving those interventions, then you can go in 6 weeks or so and say, hey, this is working great. Let's formalize it. Or you can say, you know what we're doing right now, it's not working. She needs more. Let's do some testing and figure it out. So I think you should always get a legal document if you can, but don't infuriate your school system by saying, I have to have it, have to have it, have to have it. Work with them and then come around and get it.
I'm sorry. I would start, you have, under the American Disabilities Act, juvenile myositis is a disability. You are therefore qualified for a 504, okay? There's no question. If somebody gives you a hardship in regard to that, you will call the Office of Civil Rights, and if you throw that language around, that school will immediately go, okay, well, let's shift here, okay? Because nobody wants the Office of Civil Rights coming into their school system. Get a 504, provide the documents, and then you work on the accommodations, and then you want to monitor. If your child, if they're not seeing a progression because you're starting in kindergarten, then you might want to be referring to the IEP. But the IEP is going to be a more robust under IDEA. It is a legal document, what they have said. A 504 is too, but the goals of an IEP are going to, there are specific protocols, there are specific attorney things that happen with an IEP that don't necessarily happen with the 504. But I immediately start with the 504.
Kindergarten,
100%.
Yes. She
And
qualifies.
Use those words. I'm providing these documents from the doctor. Here are the documents. Scan them in. CC yourself. Say we'd like to have a meeting, and we are requesting a 504 meeting.
And she qualifies under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Period.
So with that
Yes.
request of 504, as you said, there's a timeline of IEPs. Is there a clock running for 504?
No, you can actually go in. You can request your meeting, go in for your meeting, discuss whether or not your child is eligible, and make the plan and walk out 2 hours later with a complete 504.
Maybe let me phrase the question differently. From when you request the meeting to the time.
There's not a timeline.
Thank you.
There
There's
is
not a
not.
timeline.
Usually
But-
14 days for a request of a 504 to get back. However, if you don't hear back, you want to use the words that I'm requesting a case study or initial evaluation. Then what happens is the clock immediately starts because you are asking for special education services. The school has to respond. They can deny it and they can say no, or they can say yes, okay? But like I said, if you have documentation and you're here and you've got JDM or juvenile myositis, you are without a doubt under the American Disabilities Act.
Yes, if you, again, kind of like what he has said, if you have requested your 504 and they've ignored you, and you've requested it again and they've ignored you, and you're documenting all these requests, then I highly recommend that in your next request you inform them that if they do not reply to you, that you will be sending this off to the office of, Office of Civil Rights in DC. Yes, go ahead.
So, I need some quick advice. So my daughter just finished first grade, she's going to second grade.
Okay.
She, very fortunately, is doing great. She had some symptoms when she got diagnosed. Now she's doing really well. She had a health plan just for, flexible seating and that kind of thing in the classroom. Luckily, her teacher this year was phenomenal and worked with her and was great. So the health plan did its job and it's fine. We did the meeting just a couple weeks ago with just planning for second grade for next year with social worker, school nurse, vice principal, et cetera, the whole dog and pony show. They said, she really has no physical limitations or symptoms or challenges right now, which is great. But we said, hey, we would like to have a 504 in place for when that time, if and when that time comes.
Exactly.
Potentially she doesn't have as accommodating of a teacher in second grade.
Right.
Another teacher's going to be. Their response to that was, we are actually not allowed to make you a 504 for symptoms
Predicting.
that may come up in the future. So at that point, we feel okay about that because at least we've started the dialogue. We know who to talk to. We can start up that conversation. Is that, in your estimation, an acceptable answer for us? Should we be pushing?
I'm going to say you should go back and get the 504 for a couple of reasons. And one is that you can make a requirement of your 504 that somebody ensures that she has sunscreen on because she's only in second grade. So right there, that qualifies her for her 504.
Go with the
and
things you know, the
that's-
things that you know. You
That is
can't
something that you know.
predict. I predict she's going to have trouble down the road. Your 504 is in place, so if that trouble comes, you just add that. But you know sunscreen is going to be something.
And that is on her health plan where they allowed her to do whatever she needed to do.
Yes, but you want a legally binding document. So you want the 504, and you might be able to come up with a couple other things that you still know, but you know for sure, we all know, everybody in this room knows, we need sunscreen. Our kids need sunscreen. And so for your young children, every one of them will qualify for a 504 to make sure that there is sunscreen on them. In addition, the 504 should also mention that if the PE class is at 12 o'clock, that she should not be outside. Unless she has full sunscreen on and it's short, but some of our kids are highly sensitive to sun. So if PE is at 12, she should not be outside. If recess is at 12, she should be offered a shaded play area. So all of those things can go into a 504 now.
What she's saying, those are accommodations that should be written into the 504 plan. So the school's going to deny you of there might be these symptoms that come up. They're going to be like, well, they're none.
Right.
But to say that she needs sunscreen, to say that she needs a shaded area, to say that there needs to be accommodations put in place for any class going outside. Oh, it's nice out because it's Chicago and it's cold and now it's sunny out and we want to go outside with the class. Shade needs to be provided, and that needs to be put into the accommodations. And also, you had mentioned that the teacher's been working with her and doing certain things, like putting her in the front. That's called preferential seating. That is an accommodation.
Yes.
That is
It's actually
not.
not, they have flex seating in the school.
I
Okay.
would say and argue, and I would argue that and say that you just got preferential seating. And any other student that doesn't have that, you supersede them. In regards to
The language, but the language on 504 is seating away from the window. That is an accommodation.
Yes.
So go
That
with what
should
you
be-
know.
that should be-
Yes, go with what you know. Also, one more thing to keep in mind on accommodations, and one of the things that I didn't really think about until later, fire drills. Our kids need to not be standing for 25 minutes out in the sun because they don't have their sunscreen on if it's a fire drill. They've gone straight out the door. So our kids need one of the special plans for where they take students when there's a fire drill. So that is something to add to it. And the benefit of keeping that 504, I want to make this clear though, because we've talked about why she can still have a 504, why you want to keep the 504 even if she kind of maybe really doesn't need it, is that as soon as there is a problem, hey, we need to update the 504. You don't need to go through eligibility. You don't need a whole bunch of new stuff. You will need a note from your doctor to say, hey, these new things are happening. But that's it. You go in there, you update the 504, you add the accommodations, and you're good to go. And it's not a whole eligibility process.
You have like a 504 coordinator or one person is who's in charge of that you can communicate with.
Yeah, we have that. It's just interesting. Their comment to us, again, was, we can't do it for symptoms that are in the future. She has things like sunscreen and all this other stuff in her health plan. And then, of course, we said, well, why wouldn't we want to formalize that with 504? And then the school nurse, who is a whole other challenge in her own right, started giving us the whole, look, we take care of our kids. You're going to want
then you say, I want this in place in case I move.
Yada, yada, yada. So
That,
it's like,
yes, it's that her point is good. If you end up switching schools, but you could also say, you know what? What if you're absent and whoever is subbing for you isn't taking care of my kid that day? What if you catch the flu and are out for a week? I cannot count on only you. I need a legally binding document, and it's against the law for them to provide that for her. That is not okay. And a lot of schools do this. This is so common. We take such great care of your child. You really don't need it. We're gonna take care of her. We're gonna
Trust
take
us.
care of him, and we're doing all these different things, and we're taking great care of him. And that's great. And let them do that for a little while, but then formalize it. Because what if that teacher leaves? You can't count on
well,
it.
the nurse went as far as telling us, like, she's convinced that there's some sort of, like, 504 ambulance chasers out there who are scaring every parent in the world into getting 504s for their
Well,
kids.
there's a, I hate to say this, but there's a real interesting problem with the influx of 504 and accommodations, especially at the high school level, based on accommodations and standardized tests. So that is a true statement. There's a lot of articles in regard to that, but I would push back really hard and go, a 504 is not a complicated document. It's about 2 pages, if that. Put it into a 504 plan of what you already have for those accommodations for the sunscreen and everything. Like I said, if you want to use a buzzword, go, I'm going to contact an attorney or I'm going to contact OC on it.
I would also ask, what is your resistance? Why don't you want my daughter? Why do you want my daughter to not have what she's due? Why don't you want her to have that? Why? I mean, you say you're going to do it all, then this should not be a problem.
It's kind of, if that nurse is just being whatever because she doesn't want to have to deal with it, she has a health plan. I really don't see any difference.
Go to central office.
When my daughter was in elementary school, I always used the deal, and I was told once when we were asking for additional speech therapy, and he says, oh, just trust me, we'll get it in the fall. We'll get it taken care of in the fall. And I said, and what if you get a ski job in Vail, Colorado, and you're gone in the fall? Who's going to be there to put this in? I want this in now.
Exactly.
If I move, you move, anybody, it's there. Sure enough, he was gone in the fall. You know, but we got it put in because I always wanted to have my daughter protected.
That's very helpful, thank you.
It starts with preschool too, right?
Yep.
Yes. If your child is attending a public preschool or a preschool that accepts federal money or state money. Any other questions? Any questions about accessing community? We haven't really gone into that.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
So when we talk about accessing community, this is not as easy sometimes because most of the community activities that our kids participate in do not receive federal funding and are therefore not required to meet the needs of our children. So when we talk about accessing community, we're talking about Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, church youth group activities, soccer, karate class, any of that. Nowadays, I have to tell you, most places have dealt with a kid or two that have disabilities. And I usually start out by contacting the coach, contacting the choir director, contacting whomever it is, and saying, hey, my kid has a couple of things going on. Please let me know if there's an issue. If you come up against something, I would love to talk to you. For JM, I think I would come out and say it's really important that they have sunscreen on if you could help me out with that piece of it, or he may get tired. What I don't do is come out with a full-on, here's all the things that are wrong with my kid and you're going to love having him in your team. So I come at it with we need to do the following things and I try to keep it small and not overwhelming for that volunteer coach, which is usually a dad who has 3 kids running around of their own, and they're doing this in their free time after they get off work. So the idea here is to really do your best to partner with that coach, with that director, with that leader in terms of making it possible and easier for them to do well by your child. Does that make sense? But you guys aren't, that's not your concern yet. Are you guys all have younger kids?
Mine's 12.
Yours is 12, so you've been through that. Have you had any issues with accessing activities?
No. He played basketball and then he got diagnosed last October, so he stopped all the sports and haven't started back up yet.
Okay.
But I wanted to come in here to see if I was on the right path for his IEP, and I am. I'm very excited.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah.
So again, afterwards, we're available here and we're available by, email, phone, anytime. Well, at 2 a.m. I'm usually sleeping, but we'll work with, we'll find time. We will find time to work with you because this is kind of our passion. This is what we do. I mean, she teaches.
I mean, I do it, but I also, my jam child was a special ed kid her entire life, clear through college. So I played it on the parent side and I played it as the teacher.
And so I'm not a teacher, but I spend a lot of time with families with varying diagnoses, obviously juvenile myositis, but other diagnoses as well in my home district, helping them through the IEP or 504 process. So I'm always available as well.
So if we have time, I do have a question.
I'm on a special education department chair in Illinois at Deerfield High School, so I'm sitting in a lot of IEP and 504 meetings and stuff. So, and I have a daughter, obviously, that got diagnosed May of last year. So I figured I would just jump in. So sorry.
No, I didn't want to just offer you, but
Yeah,
we have another person. We may make a list.
help out or
Got another one,
come to an
an
end.
ADA coordinator.
Oh, there we go. We have an ADA coordinator. So we have a lot of expertise, and maybe what we should do is just make a list of people that are available to help out. Because we don't need to be competing with each other to help people out, because we all have lots of people to help. But if we make sure that everybody gets the help they need, I think that would be fantastic. Okay, somebody else said they had something. I forget which hand went up.
I have a question. So, my son was diagnosed last school year, and he ended up doing the hospital homebound program. He gained 40 pounds, scared to go back, weak for a long time, so he couldn't go back. And then he wanted to go back, so he did for 2 hours a day. But we did it was 4 hours a week at the hospital homebound, so an hour a day, because he couldn't sit there for 2 hours for 2 days. So 1 hour, 4 days a week. He's excited to start junior high because he's going to make all these new friends, and you're not going to know that he looks completely different than he did last October. But I think that he was triggered by the lights at his school. And everyone said, or the doctor says, fluorescent lighting is a trigger. But his school that he started at was brand new and it just opened. Every light in the building was LED. So when he ended up going back months later, I took before and after pictures, and he's perfectly good. And then afterwards, rash on his face. And I had sunscreen on him and everything. So we ended up trying it off and on for 2 weeks, and then it was the end of school. I'm scared to death because the junior high, it's all fluorescent, but I know I have a feeling it was the LED that I don't want to say the word caused because I learned that in the moms group. Triggered it for him. But what is another option? Like, let's say he starts junior high in August and he's triggered again. The homebound was awesome. He passed with A's and B's, but he learned nothing.
So here's what I'm going to, here's what I'm going to say. If he has a physical response to the lights, there are school systems that have changed out the lights. But usually that's for like an elementary classroom. It's really not throughout an entire building. That's a pretty excessive cost for a school system. But you would be in a position to request a separate school. Perhaps there's a private school that has a different lighting setup or something. You would be in a position to say the school district cannot appropriately educate my child and I need him to go someplace else. Now you've got a long way to go before you get to that point, but that could be your final point. Also, it may be that he responds to LED lights and not to fluorescent. So that's something that you may want to watch. I'm trying to remember back. So for Jane's 1 year, we bought those sun beads, and we did LED lights, the regular lights, and then the fluorescent lights. And LEDs are pretty strong. So it may be just that he was reacting to the LED lights, but I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to say that that's
You
it.
have to have significant documentation from the doctor explaining that for a school system to make some of the moves. It will be, because, and I don't know if, I'm new to this, so if doctors, if it is fluorescent light, or I have not heard that before, but if that is the cause, you better have some major, like the documentation from the doctor stating that the fluorescent lights, or we tested in these places and so on and so forth, and the fluorescent lights are the cause of it. And then you have some definite grounds for it. But it's like, could be other things or whatnot.
Did you see a dermatologist?
It's a science fair experiment that you'll have to, literally, it's going to be a science fair experiment. You're going to have to work it out and figure it out. He's exactly right. You have to have a lot of documentation to prove this, but it is. There are some kids who are extremely sun and light sensitive. And there are some kids that are not. And so it's hard to know which is which, but you might also, if you think this is something you need to look into, you might want to get documentation from physicians. There's an antibody. Okay, now we're getting into medical stuff. There is an antibody that is usually associated with more skin disease and more rashiness. And so you may want to look into having his antibodies checked to see if he has that antibody. That might help you with some of the, convincing and the documentation and paperwork. But again, there are kids that have that same antibody that are fine. So that would just be another piece that would show that he has the higher skin issues. I think, are we done? Are we good? Any other questions? All right. Thanks.